So question of the day, Mike. How's Scrum doing?
Scrum is not happening.
No? Lame.
No. Well, as we were talking about before we hit the red button, basically since we recorded the last episode, which has been a while, we've had a couple of issues. Your internet got knocked out. I had to travel.
Yep.
I really haven't done anything with my OmniFocus. So confession time. I confessed this on the latest episode of Free Agents that we recorded as well. I feel a little bit like a productivity hypocrite because I find myself in this place where I don't even think about the things that I have to do and then select the most important thing. I don't even know everything that I need to do. All I know is that I need to get this course off the ground, and I know what the next thing is. And so I do the next thing, and then I see two more things that I need to do. And I'm just in the thick of it right now. I told David when we recorded, I'm telling all of you right now that this is not a normal state for me. I'm not going to stay here. But over the holidays, I'm going to take some time off, and we're going to hit the reset button, and everything's going to be back the way it's supposed to be. My email is going to be back under control. I'm not going to have 700 unread messages anymore. All the wheels have basically fallen off, but it's been good because I have been able to make some significant progress.
Sure.
And as we're recording this, I actually launched my personal retreat course yesterday. So things are moving in the right direction. Hopefully we can get these things kind of moving on their own and I don't have to babysit them so much. And then we can kind of take a step back, breathe, and reevaluate the systems. But for now, it's a little bit crazy in Mike's world. So
right.
Scrum and OmniFocus was not going to happen this time.
Well, it happens sometimes.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, it was worth a shot, though, right? You know, these things happen.
You had the same thing. You were going to do a personal Scrum setup. Did you succeed?
Yeah, I've been running it. It's been going pretty well for me. I feel like it's been a pretty good balance of getting the planning for the week ahead nailed down and then basically having a way of knowing, am I planning to do more than I can handle? Like that's a lot of what the big pieces are there. So I found it extremely helpful. I'm going to keep doing it, but I will say that you having the break from it for a little while, like that sometimes has to happen when you've got a lot going on one project, because it seems like you can just go heads down on the project and it's more work than it's worth to constantly be add things and then check them off, add them and check them off.
Yep.
It seems to get to where it's too much sometimes. So yes, I feel like it's sometimes that you have to step away from it at times. So I'm not in that spot right now, but I'm in the middle of a transition work-wise. Like we did the episode on free agents. We're talking about free agents a lot today already. But free agents, we did that episode about how I'm leaving free agency to go work for a corporation. Well, that's going to be happening next week, pending paperwork at the moment. So, yeah, there's a lot going on there, which means that the whole Scrum thing has been very well flexed lately, trying to help me keep that under control. So, yes, I'm still definitely in the thick of it, and it's been going pretty well. So I'm happy with it.
Nice. You said something at the beginning of that, along the lines of Scrum has helped you identify how much you could actually do.
Yes.
And I'm not kidding when I say like it's been crazy busy.
Yep.
I feel like if I would have done that, I would have recognized that I've got twice as much to do as I can possibly do. And then it's like, well, figure out a way to do it anyway. On Monday, just as an example, I edited, exported, uploaded, and published all 10 videos for the personal retreat course. I created half of the workbook pages, so there were like 5 or 6 designs that I had to get done that day. I talked to you, and you helped me spin up a discourse forum associated with the site. I decided to host a goal-setting workshop, so I signed up for a webinar platform, integrated it with my email marketing, and then created the landing page and the event for all of that. Like, it's been ridiculous. I get done, and I journal at the end of the day, and I like, what did you accomplish? And it's like a week's worth of work. But I know it's not sustainable, so I know I gotta stop revving the engine so hard pretty soon. But right now it's just, you do what you got to do.
Yep.
Which, interestingly, we've talked about free agents a lot this episode. David and I made an announcement on the episode that went live as we're recording this yesterday that we're pivoting the show and we're going to talk a lot more about productivity, but from a different perspective and a more authentic perspective, I think. It's going to be rebranded as Focused, and it's going to be a productivity podcast about more than cranking widgets. It's going to be talking about intentionality and sharing a lot of the struggles and the mistakes that we make, which is something that is missing in the productivity space a lot of times. You see the experts, quote unquote, sharing these are the 3 things you got to do to reclaim 10 hours a week, whatever. And so my hope is that it's going to be refreshing in the productivity podcast space, because it's going to be a little bit different approach to it. We're still going to dive deep on some of the topics and share the things that we learn. You can apply them to your life and hopefully improve your life that way. Really, the only thing that would be required to benefit from the podcast, I think, would be the growth mindset. And just a little bit, talking about the reason behind that, we recognized after you put together the Mac Power Users discourse that there are a ton of people who listen to free agents who aren't free agents.
Yeah.
And who have no intention of being a free agent. They just like the content. They understand the mindsets and the principles, and they apply them to their own life, which I think is awesome. But also, I think that there's a lot of people who don't even listen to the show because of the name, who could fall into that category and who could benefit from the discussion.
Sure.
And so we want to make it more open, appeal maybe to a broader audience, but really not change the show all that much, other than it's not going to be called Free Agents, and we're not going to be talking about freelancing quite as much. We're going to be talking about a lot of the same principles and ideas and systems and things like that, but it's going to be a little bit more general. And also it's going to open us up to have a few more interesting guests on there. Like Chris Bailey is going to be on there actually. Nice. In January, I believe.
Nice.
So it should be fun.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting. It seems definitely you and David. Like, I feel like that'll be a really good fit. Definitely, for sure. So I'm excited about this one. I've known it's coming for a while, so I'm excited about it.
Sweet. Yeah. And I also want to say, because I know we were chatting before this, and there's people out there who are a little bit concerned maybe about how should I say this? The one more thing in the productivity space. I think that if you have an idea that is worth sharing, you don't need to worry about whether somebody else is doing it already. And I just want to throw that out there, because I know that there are people, myself, I've been there, where it's like, I don't want to do something that somebody else is already doing. And a lot of times you may be talking about the exact same things even, but you've got a different perspective. You've got different dots that you're connecting. And so just go make your thing. That's kind of what I'm learning as I'm going through this faith-based productivity thing. Is like, well, I'm super niche on some of this stuff, and it's not going to appeal to a lot of different people, but for the people who it does appeal to, like, they're raving fans. They absolutely love this thing. There's always going to be an audience. The internet is big enough for both of us. Or all of us, I should say. Yeah.
I know that there's quite a few productivity-ish and related podcasts and things that are out there, but there's a lot of those that I don't listen to, because I don't really resonate with the hosts that much. Mm-hmm. Whereas I know that I do resonate with you and David. So I'm one that will listen to Free Agents and then Focused, and then I'll skip on almost all the other shows, just because I have a relationship with you guys, and I feel like you guys have a lot of the same views I do, and I resonate with you, whereas I don't with others. So yeah, I say that because I know there's a lot of folks who have talked about or want to get into the space. It's like, go for it. Because yes, there may be quite a few people out there, but there's always going to be, a group who don't really resonate with the people who are already there, and your voice is likely the one that they will resonate with. So just go make your thing.
Just as to proof of that, in the Productivity Guild, there is a thread on goal planning for 2019. And I was tagged in the discussion saying, what do you do? And before I could respond, somebody else had posted in there, I do a personal retreat, and here's a link to my PDF guide. And my response when I saw that was, that's awesome. Like, way to go with that. It's actually really well put together. It's totally not the way I would do it, but
right.
That's fine. It works, whatever works for you. And so I shared my stuff in there and my process, but it just shows the point, like that I ended my comment with, the world needs more personal retreats. Like it doesn't bother me that you put together this thing and it's free, and I put together this course and I'm selling it. Like, because you could have that response. It's like, oh, this is a competitor. No, we're not competitors. We're buddies.
Yep. Agreed.
And since I talked about it, I don't like the self-promotion, but I do want to just throw this out there because I mentioned it a couple of times. The personal retreat course is available. And I'm doing the same thing for listeners of Bookworm that I did for listeners of Free Agents, which is a 50% discount until the beginning of the year. So if it's normally $47, I think it's $23.50 then if you get the discount. And so you just use the coupon code Bookworm when you check out, and you can save 50% on that. And then I also mentioned the goal setting workshop that I was doing. That's going to happen January 5th, which is a Saturday at 12 p.m. Central Time. And really what inspired this was I've done a lot of these for agent efficiency in the past. So I was kind of in the back of my mind, I wanted to do one of these sometime. And then I read a statistic that 92% of New Year's resolutions next year are going to fail. And I got more upset than I probably should have. In my newsletter that went out today, I mentioned like, I have to do something about this.
Yes.
So I'm hosting this goal setting workshop, and I'm going to walk through actually a lot of the exercises that are in the courses, and just kind of help people connect to the why behind the goals that they want to set, or the resolutions if you wanted to frame it a different way, and help this be the year that you actually achieve your goals. So the workshop is free. I think there's limited space, but I don't know what it is, whatever the webinar software's limit is. But there'll be a link to that in the show notes if you want to reserve your spot.
Nice.
All right, stop talking about my stuff. Let's get into this book.
All right. So takeaways here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got to do one more because there's listener of the show, Michael Diamond. He's actually kind of like a mentor of mine. He bought a Bookworm t-shirt when we did the campaign a while back. He's got a website, and he's putting together this huge list of his favorite books. And this is somebody that I really respect, somebody who reads a lot. And he's actually been in the national news lately. He's a really smart guy, and he's got a list of his favorite books. And I remember one of the comments that people made was, you got to quit talking about the productivity and self-help stuff all the time. And my response in the Bookworm Club was, well, that's what I like. But Michael Diamond has a list which has all the great categories. So he's got history, he's got biographies, he's got a whole bunch of things. He showed me basically the work in progress, the draft version of this. And I asked him if I could share it with Bookworm. And so I've got the link. We're going to put this in the show notes. He's assured me that this is going to be live by the time the episode publishes. But when he showed it to me, it was really close. And I think that for people who wish we would cover a broader selection of books on Bookworm, there's going to be some great resources on this list.
Got it. Because I was clicking the link from the show notes thinking, this 404s, Mike, like this doesn't exist.
Yep.
Okay, that makes more sense.
It was basically done, and then I told him, hey, that looks great, except it would look even better if you had like pictures of the books and like the actual physical books thing. Like,
got it.
You created more work for me. So
Got it.
He's working on it still. But.
So you made it harder for him. Okay, good job.
Yep.
All right. That said, we're going to step into a book today that is not in the self-help, productivity space at all. Like, this is very, very different than what we normally do. Today's book is Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, who we've done one of his previous books, The Checklist Manifesto, one of my favorites that we've done so far. And this, I'll put it this way. Mike and I had we normally catch up a little bit before or after the show. We definitely did it before the show this time because I think we were both just a little nervous about hitting the record button today.
Yeah.
So the tagline on this book is Medicine and What Matters in the End. This is about end-of-life care, aging, and death. Very different than what we normally cover, Mike.
Yep.
So I think this will be an interesting conversation. I feel like this was a very eye-opening book and has led to a lot of questions, conversations, and such. But this is one I'm glad to have read, but I will say I think this book probably made me cry more than any book we've read by a long shot. So
yeah, this is a tough one.
Very large number of tears shed over this one.
Yeah, this was difficult to read for sure. And I want to preface this at the beginning because I feel like on this topic, we are not qualified to really talk about it.
Sure. Yeah.
The productivity stuff, the self-help stuff, maybe I should feel the same way about that stuff, but I've been in that world for long enough that I feel more confident saying and sharing my opinions about different ideas in that arena. This one, I really don't know what to do, because I haven't had to go through some of the stuff that they talk about in here. Both of my parents are still living, and they're both pretty healthy. I remember going through it with my grandparents, but I was in high school at the time and didn't really get it, So it feels like it's been a long time since I've had to go through that. And there's some really heavy stuff in here. There really are no right answers, I feel like, for any of these specific situations. There's so much nuance that goes along with everything in here. And I just want to preface this by saying, like, we're going to do our best to treat the subject with care and with sensitivity. But if I say something stupid, please forgive me, because I don't have the perspective that Dr. Gawande has.
Agreed. Yeah, for sure. Because I know that, like, I run sound at church, and one of the things you don't think about when you say that is that our church hosts quite a few weddings, but even more so, a lot of funerals. And with that, somebody's got to run the sound system. So I find myself at the church at a lot of funerals, and sometimes it's babies, it's grandparents, great-grandparents, it's young dads, young moms. Like, it's hard. Like, those are hard conversations, and it's hard being there in the room at one of these funerals, hearing the stories and understanding what exactly happened. These are people I don't know most of the time. Like, these are complete strangers, and yet it's very emotional even to just be there with them and try to serve them in some way. I would say that is very different than this, if this was my parents that we were talking about, who developed a cancer of some kind, and we needed to make decisions about end-of-life care. That's very different than experiencing it with strangers, of course. But at the same time, I think that Atul Gawande takes us through this process in a very emotional and a very detailed way, tells a lot of stories that are very hard to read sometimes. And I think when you come out of it, you have a sense of not necessarily closure on what you should do when confronted with an end-of-life situation, but more along the lines of how should you think about it, and how do you make decisions once you get to the point of realizing that you are at an end-of-life stage. So I think there's a lot of hard questions to ask here. And again, I think you're right, Mike, that this is going to be kind of tricky to work through. So it's very possible we may misquote something or say something off base. So feel free to call us out on it. But at the same time, this is not a simple topic either.
No, I can basically guarantee I'm going to say something stupid.
Sure.
So I apologize in advance.
And it kicks off in the introduction, even.
Yes. So the introduction introduces us to a character named Mr. Lazaroff. And the reason that I put this one in here is that he shares a statement which, as I read the rest of the book, I found myself coming back to this over and over again, because it kind of challenges everything else that Dr. Gawande talks about. But he says, "Don't you give up on me. You give me every chance I've got." So using that as to set the tone for this book, basically, this is an older guy who they're trying to decide, do you want to go through this surgery or not? What's the best thing that could happen if you go through it? What's going to happen if you don't go through it? Whatever. And he responds by saying, basically, give me every chance that I've got. So they do the operation. It's technically a success, but he ends up dying anyways. And the point that they make at the introduction of this book is that before they did the operation, they avoided talking honestly about the choice that was really before him. And you need to have those difficult conversations, and you need to let the patient understand what all of the possibilities are, and then let them make their own decision. It kind of challenges the traditional view of medicine, at least the way Dr. Gawande proposed it in this book, which was basically just do everything you can to keep the patient alive, do no harm, sort of a thing. And he's basically saying that maybe that's not the best thing for the patient in a lot of cases. And again, like, I'm not qualified to say yes or no, but as I'm thinking about Mr. Lazaroff and somebody who this seems like a fairly common response to me, and I'm trying to put myself in these shoes. If my dad is trying to decide whether he wants to have the surgery or not, and he says to me, "Don't you give up on me? You give me every chance that I've got." I mean, I'm going through with it, regardless of the risks. But Dr. Gawande is saying, well, maybe you shouldn't, basically.
I feel like it's a classic, quantity of life versus quality of life.
Yep.
And we have a tendency to say that quantity of life is always the trump card. Like, if you can extend my life by 2 days, it's worth it. But what if those 2 days are you spent in a hospital bed and you sacrificed a week with grandkids to get those 2 days? Like, that's the question he's asking.
Yep.
And that, if you look at it in a retrospect, yeah, sure, you could probably make that decision. Especially, you and I can make that decision right now because we're not we're not there. We're not in a hospital sitting in with 3 nurses and a doctor trying to make that decision. We're not there. We can do that right now. That's easy. But put me in the hospital, and if that's my wife that's that we're having this conversation about, it's going to be very hard for me to make that clean decision like that.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And he shares a vision in this introduction section too, which, I mean, this is pretty heavy, but he said that he had this recurring nightmare where the corpses of the people who had died showed up at his house. Holy cow. But really, like, the thing that got him moving in this direction was this vision, and then encountering these patients he talks about on page 3, and being forced to confront the realities of where they are. Like, they're in the middle of decline and mortality, and he said it didn't take long to realize how unready I was to help them. And it really is emotional. Again, I know nothing about this world, but he kind of frames it as like the system doesn't teach you what you need to know to look somebody who's older and dying in the eyes and actually help them, not just prolong their life, but help them live their best life until the point where they die. And like I said, I feel completely unqualified to talk about this.
Sure. Yeah, because we are, And I would almost venture to say there's very few people who feel qualified to talk about it. Thankfully, Dr. Gawande is one of those. I feel that is very well respected and has the ability to talk about this stuff. But I also know that when you think about, because I'm reflecting on a number of the doctors that I worked with going through all of my Lyme disease process. It was very much an informational, like, here's what we know, but never was it asked, how are you feeling with all this? Like, that's not, the emotional side doesn't seem to be at the forefront of a lot of doctors and nurses' thoughts. Maybe I'm wrong on that. At least that's been my perception, but it doesn't seem to be the norm, at least. And I kind of wish it was, but I don't know what you do to get to that point.
Yeah.
But that's what he's getting at here is you get to a point where you're talking with somebody who has cancer and they're dealing with or coming to grips with the fact that this is it. Like, the chemo's not working. Now what? And being able to have those conversations about the reality of the situation versus, well, here's a third type of chemo that you could try. And it does have like a 10% success. Well, that's just information sharing. Like, that's not actually working through what the patient wants in that case.
Yep.
That's not a simple thing to approach. And I understand it from the doctor's stance. Like, I wouldn't want to bring that up. I wouldn't want to be the one that says, hey, by the way, you're dying. Like, what? That's insensitive. Like, that's not a thing I would want to bring up. But he's the one saying that, maybe we do need to bring it up.
Yeah, agreed. Also, playing into this conversation and my perspective and my inner turmoil with this topic is my religious belief system. Because I have seen people close to me who have been healed of cancer, and the doctors don't know how they were healed. And I believe that faith has a big part to do with that. It really doesn't have any place in the discussion of this book, I feel. But if you have somebody who has faith that they can and will be healed, and like Mr. Lazaroff, they say, don't you give up on me, you give me every chance I've got. I feel like there's not a whole lot you to do in that situation. You pray and you believe God or whatever, and that's the other side of this coin, and I don't have a simple answer for that. I try to disconnect from that as I read through the rest of this book, because he is approaching it from a medical perspective, and you look at the facts and you make an informed decision. But that's also, like I said, based on my experience. I've seen people close to me. Rachel's mom was healed of cancer, and so how do you weigh that into this conversation? I don't know.
Yeah, because he's definitely in the science side of this.
Yep.
I feel like you and I could have a whole conversation about, how does God play into this conversation, but he's left completely out of this book entirely.
Which is fine. Again, this is a medical doctor talking about this from a medical perspective, and I know we get accused of bringing our faith into this podcast too much.
Whoops.
Literally, like Rachel's mom, we had communion, we prayed for her, and she went into the doctor and the cancer was gone. Like, you can't explain that. And I don't know what Dr. Gawande would say about something like that, but I've seen it happen myself. So like, it's real, and you can define real based on your own experiences, your own belief systems, however you want to, but that's what's going through my mind as I read this. I also think there is very much a valid perspective to everything that he shares here. It really challenged me, and we're going to get into some of this stuff in a little bit, like specifically the assisted living and like the poor houses, that sort of thing. Like that's crazy. But I just am having a really hard time, and this is a big reason why I was hesitant to record this one, like reconciling all of this in my head and trying to speak to it in a way that is bringing information and value to the person who's going to invest their time to listen to this, and not just hearing me from a religious perspective say, oh, you got to believe God. Like, you got to have wisdom too, and you got to listen to wisdom, and you got to look at the facts. But also, like, the facts can tell part of the picture, and you can believe that picture, and then that picture may not be the true reality. Like, there's so much nuance to this. It's so difficult for me to talk about this. I feel a lot of weight and a lot of responsibility in trying to articulate this the right way. I'm trying to be very careful with my words, and I feel even then like I'm failing miserably.
You get over it. We'll be all right. All right, let's do this. Let's just jump in. So chapter 1, the independent self. You got a couple points here, one of which is activities of daily living. Where are you going with that?
Yeah, well, there were a couple lists in this section which were interesting to me, because I, for the last several years, have worked with a family business that creates software. Even before I was working with Asian deficiency, like I've been doing this out of college, create software for special education. And there's a subset of people in special education with moderate to severe disabilities who the classification for the type of instruction that they need would be something like independent living skills. And so when he's talking about these activities of daily living, this is a lot of the stuff that our software is designed to help people with moderate to severe special needs do. He's got the 8 activities of daily living, which are use the toilet, eat, dress, bathe, groom, get out of bed, get out of a chair, and walk. And then there's 8 independent activities of daily living, which are shop for yourself, prepare your own food, maintain your housekeeping, do your laundry, manage your medications, make phone calls, travel on your own, handle your finances. So those are kind of all independent living skills. And those are the things that we've worked with a lot of people over the years to get them to the point where they can live as independently as possible. And when he's talking about in this first chapter, the independent self, the way I read this is kind of like, if you have somebody who is independent and then at some point they become dependent, at what point did they cross that line? Like, how many of these things do they have to be able to check the box in order to make their own decisions still, sort of a thing? because I mentioned the nursing homes and the assisted living and stuff like that. That's one of the things that really impacted me in this book, and we'll talk about that in a few chapters where it really comes up again. But as someone with parents who are doing great, but my parents are both about 70 years old, and so it's going to come to the point not too far into the future where they're not going to be able to live completely independently. And what happens at that point? Do we stick them in a nursing home? And I should say, like, the nursing home may be the right answer for some people, but it shouldn't be, I would argue, the default answer, which is kind of what it's become. And he even talks about later on, like, this daughter who goes into a nursing home with her father to look at it, the person who's there is selling it to the daughter. He's not even talking to her dad, who's going to be living there. And he's just kind of resigned to the fact that, like, my daughter doesn't want to take care of me, sort of a thing. Like, he doesn't say that, but that's kind of the picture that you get.
Right.
You know? And so, I don't know. Like, again, there's no right answer to this, but I like the list here of the activities daily living. It really got me thinking, like, okay, so these are the things that we kind of accept as, like, this is what you need to be able to do. But then maybe one of these things you can't do anymore. That's a warning sign. A couple of them, now you've really got to start thinking about this. And it shouldn't just be, okay, now I need to take care of my elderly parents. I've got all this stuff going on. I have to take my kids all these different places. I have no idea where this came from. I never saw this coming. Well, if you look at these lists, like, you can basically see this coming. And then don't make a decision, a reactionary decision based off of the needs of your current situation, because you can't figure out a way to do that. Like, I feel like if you see it coming, you can make modifications and you can take steps which are going to allow you to take care of elderly parents and not just put them under somebody else's care. And that's really the second point where he compares, like, aging in India versus aging in the U.S., because they're two totally different things.
Yes. And that's, this is a thing that really struck me. Because as I was reading this first chapter, I finished the first chapter and thought, I feel like I would rather live in India right now. Like, that's my thought, because he tells the story of his grandfather who ran a farm in India, and then he was, late 80s, and he had some health issues that struck at that point. And instead of, if you go back to this list of activities of daily living, I think it was close to half of those he was incapable of doing.
Yep.
After, I want to say it was like a stroke or something. I'm blanking on what it was, the health issue was. But he was incapable of doing close to half of those activities. In the U.S., that would immediately put him in a situation where they would highly recommend a nursing home, and look at something along those lines. Whereas in India, it just meant that the sons and daughters and grandkids got involved with helping grandpa with his day-to-day life, which kind of dumbfounded me. It's like, well, yeah, I know of people who do that and take care of their parents and such, but that's a lot of work, to be honest.
Yep.
And it kind of struck me on a little bit of a different chord, because, in that realm, he ended up living to where he was in his over 100 years old. So he lived for quite a while after that in that scenario, having never gone into formal long-term care of any kind. And it kind of struck me in a couple ways. One, we don't have that expectation in the U.S. at all. Well, I shouldn't say at all. The majority of people don't expect that. Nursing homes are kind of the de facto answer there. And two, it was kind of sad to think about how, families are quite distributed across the U.S. anymore. Even my immediate family, we're spread out quite a bit. And I'm the one who is the furthest away. So, I think about that, and it's kind of concerning. But it's interesting how that has led us to a point where it's not really an option to just move in with your kids when you hit that point. Like, say you're not able to do half of these activities of daily living. It's not normal to move in with your kids long term anyway. Like, sure, it happens as kind of a halfway point until you can find a nursing home, but it doesn't seem to be the norm. But is that because families aren't as close as they used to be? Are they not as reliant on each other as they used to be? I feel like there's a lot of potential reasons for that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a little bit disheartening to think about that we just don't help our own families out as much as what we used to. So it was kind of sad to think that through.
Bottom line is we're all a bunch of selfish jerks.
Well, there's that.
Seriously, that's. I mean, he talks about some of the different contributing factors to the situation, and I think that a couple things are worth calling out here. Number one is that people are living longer, and number two, that wisdom and status are no longer being attributed to the elderly. So in India, where wisdom and status are attributed to the elderly, the aged live how they want, supported by their family, because that's what you do. Grandpa's earned the right to live how he wants. But in the U.S., we view it as having to take care of my elderly parents. It's like a convenience. It's cramping my style. So
yeah,
I gotta figure out how to get my freedom back. And it really is selfish if you think about it. The question that he poses here, based on those lists of independent daily living, is if independence is what we live for, what happens when it can no longer be attained? And I think the respect and the wisdom that you attribute to the elder generation, that's definitely going to influence the decision that you make. But that's also not what happens in the U.S. for a lot of people. I mentioned like the story about the lady bringing her dad to look at the nursing home and the salesperson selling the nursing home to her. Like that just seems so wrong to me. But I don't know. I mean, that's where we are. So the big question then is like, where do we go from here? And it's going to be different for every situation. Like I said, there's so much nuance associated with this. I really can't make a call and be like, this is what should happen. But I will say that it challenged me. And by the end of this book, I was like, there's no way my parents are going to a nursing home. I'm doing everything I can.
Yeah, I can't say I made it to that point, Mike, but I'm not far. I feel like there's a lot here. And it's an empowering book, I think, in that way, to your point. Like, my parents are not going to a nursing home. But at the same time, like, we are still in a point where we do like our freedom to a pretty large degree. So, yes, I feel like it's not that simple.
Right. It's definitely not that simple.
No, not at all. All right, chapter 2. Things fall apart, Mike.
Yes, they do, and they fall apart quickly. We don't really need to spend a ton of time in here, but there is a story about a lady, Jean Gavrils, I think is how you say that. And she was living on her own and was doing fine, and then things fell apart, hence the the chapter title.
Yep.
So basically, in this section, they talk about the 3 primary risk factors of falling, because falling is a big thing that causes people to quickly go from being able to live independently to not being able to live independently, and then very quickly coming to the end of their life. They actually said that the greatest threat to elderly people was falling, because 40% of people who fall end up in a nursing home and 20% can never walk again. So from there, it's a quick downward spiral. But the 3 primary factors or risk factors for falling are poor balance, taking more than 4 medications, and muscle weakness. So when she goes in to the doctor because she's got back pain and this thing with her lung, they get fixated on her lack of balance and the 5 medications that she's on. And they're like, we really need to make sure that you do not fall, because if you don't have any of those risk factors, then you have basically a 12% chance of falling. But if you have all 3 of them, you're at virtually 100%. And Jean had 2 of them. So I thought this was an interesting perspective on, like, you go in for one thing and then the wisdom of the doctor, they recognize that something else is wrong. And then they're able to identify, this is the thing that we really need to be careful of. This is the thing that could end your independence quickly. And so this is what we're going to do to fix this and the other stuff that's minor.
I feel like there's a lot there that you could unpack. I think so this, I'm just going to say this. This is where my action item came from. I have one. But this is where it started, I guess, because Jean's story here concerned me quite a bit. Like, okay, between my parents, my in-laws, probably more so my in-laws than my parents, as hard as that is to say, if something happened and happened quickly, I feel like we would want to be very involved. But at the same time, it means that we need to have some of these difficult conversations now.
Yeah.
Versus waiting. Because how many times in the book does he tell a story and then they have to ask some hard questions that no one wants to answer, but they should have really asked those questions 6 years prior or a decade prior or longer. Like, I don't want to be in that position. I don't want to be in a spot where I need to ask, how do you want us to handle things if you're incapable to make decisions for yourself? That's not a fun conversation.
Yeah, don't walk up to your in-laws and say, how do you want to die?
Yeah, but at the same time, they may not be able to answer those questions, but it should at least spark the thought process to work through that.
Yep.
And again, that's not a fun thing to bring up. You have to be very delicate in how you even approach the topic, but it's still one that I feel like needs brought up because things can happen quickly.
Yep.
And that was my takeaway from this chapter.
I think we got to be delicate in how we approach this topic, and we're still going to lose a bunch of listeners.
Well, to each their own.
Yeah. No, I agree. That action item could probably come from a lot of these different chapters. That really is the only action item that you could possibly have from this book. I didn't have an action item, by the way, because I'm not ready to have those talks yet. But it does make me think about it. Like I mentioned, as I'm reading this book, and especially in the next couple chapters where they talk about the nursing homes, I'm like, my parents are not going there. But I do recognize that at some point you are going to have those difficult conversations, and you are going to have to figure out how to come to an agreement with these things. And again, no easy answers to that. Should we talk about nursing homes?
I don't want to, but I feel like we should.
All right. So chapter 3 is called Dependence, and all my notes basically from this section have to do with the Irving Goffman, who compared prisons and nursing homes in his book Asylum. There were 4 characteristics. All aspects of life are conducted in the same place and under the same central authority. Number 2, each phase of the member's daily activity is carried on in the immediate company of a large batch of others. Number 3, all phases of the day's activities are tightly scheduled. And number 4, the various and forced activities are brought together into a single plan, purportedly designed to fulfill the official aims of the institution. And as you read those 4 things, I'm not sure what kind of reaction you had, but I'm like, that sounds miserable. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Not a painting nursing homes in a very positive light, but also in this chapter, they talk about the history of them. Because in the early 1900s, the elderly that weren't wealthy or had children to take care of them went to poorhouses, which were sad, disgusting places for elderly paupers, out-of-luck immigrants, young drunks, and the mentally ill. And they typically sprang up, he mentions in the book, in countries that were transitioning from poverty to wealth, because at that point, you are breaking up the extended families without producing enough affluence to really take care of these people. So they're kind of falling through the cracks. And on page 71, he says that nursing homes weren't created to help people facing dependency in old age. They were created to clear out hospital beds. And when you think about it that way, I don't know, it just left a very poor taste in my mouth. But I can think back to all the nursing homes that I have been in. We even have a ministry at our church where once a month we go to the nursing home that's down the street from our church, and it's got a reputation in town as not a very nice one. And we just go visit with people who don't have anybody else who is going to come visit them. And every time you step in there, like it doesn't feel great. It feels great talking to the people and seeing the reactions that they have and how appreciative they are. But just walking into the place, like as he's describing this, I'm like, oh, yep, that's that place. We go there once a month.
Yep.
Like he's hitting the nail on the head. And I know that they're not all that way. And in a couple chapters, we'll talk about Bill Thomas, who had a different way of doing things. So there are people who are challenging this, but understanding the history behind it, I don't know, it just helps me see where we got where we are. And then also just makes me feel real sad for the current situation, and challenges me, like, what can I do to help this? And like I said, we've got a ministry at our church where we're going once a month. That's great. That's one small step in the right direction, but there's a lot of hurting people there, and there's probably a lot more that I could do.
Yeah. I think we're generalizing when we say nursing homes, when we talk about the state of nursing homes, as he does as well. And he acknowledges that in the book. He's like, this is not necessarily, like, it's not every nursing home, because he knows of nursing homes that do things absolutely right.
Yep.
And again, we'll talk about one of those here in a little bit. But, generally speaking, there are a lot of similarities between nursing homes and prisons, to your point earlier. And this just struck me so hard. You think about what happens in prison versus what happens in a nursing home. Like, well, it's all a set schedule. Everyone gets up at the same time. Meals happen at the same time.
Yep.
All of that happens. Like, everything's dictated.
You have no control over
everything. Is, when do you take your medications? When are you going to take a bath? Like, all of that all has to happen on a schedule that's set by someone other than yourself. Well, that's the same thing in a prison. Like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So, just taking a step back, you and I are creatures of habit. We do things based on routines. We have our way of doing things. If someone told me that I now needed to get up at 6 o'clock and I was going to have breakfast once, not twice, lunch was going to happen at 11:30, we'll have game time at 1 p.m., like, if someone started dictating that to me all the time, I'm pretty sure I would revolt.
Yeah, exactly. Which makes it easy to see then why there are so many people there that are bitter. One of my Gap books, I forget which episode it was for, was 30 Lessons for Living. And it was written by a guy who went to all of these different nursing homes, and he found the bright spots, the people who have the great personality. They're always smiling. They've got joy, which is not normal for that situation, because a lot of those people are there. It is a prison to them. They're there against their will. They don't want to be there, but they're not independent enough to do anything about it. Their kids stuck them there and they never come to visit. That sounds very general and negative, but that's the story of a lot of the people at the one that we go visit. It's really, really sad. So the 30 Lessons for Living, though, he goes and he interviews thousands of these people who have a different perspective about what are the things that allowed you to live a good life? Why do you have the attitude that you have? And so there is obviously things that you can do to overcome your circumstances. It's not just a situation that you happen to be in, but it's easy to see how you can default to that, and you really can't blame anybody who's stuck in that nursing home because their kids don't want to take care of them.
Right.
Like, that's convicting to me. I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, and I suppose we need to be careful there too, because their kids don't want to take care of them. That may not necessarily be the case.
True. Yeah, again, we're generalizing. I'm going to say stupid stuff. I apologize.
Yep. I just caught that one. That's all. Because I know of, even personally, I know of situations where it's not a matter of whether or not, son or daughter want to put mom or dad in a nursing home. It's simply not an option.
Correct. But there are people that we go visit, like, hey, how you doing? Oh, okay. And you get to talking to them, and like, do you have any family? Yeah. Do they live nearby? Yeah, they live in town. Oh, so do you get to see them? No, they haven't been here in years. Like, that shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It's way too common for the people that we minister to anyway.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, it's over common, but I just wanted to say, it's not necessarily everybody, for sure. Okay.
Thank you for clarifying.
So many disclaimers this time around. Yeah, it's sensitive topics.
So many.
Gotta love it. Chapter 4, assistance. I feel like you have a lot to say on this one, but a lot of it has to do with kind of a new way that came out after nursing homes, because nursing homes and poorhouses got quite a bit of press. I forget the time frame. The 40s? 20s? I'm drawing a
don't
blank.
remember, to tell you the truth. We
Somewhere
read
in
this
there.
book a while ago. It's been a while since we have tried to record it.
Yeah, we had a hard time getting recording done on this one, but there was kind of this next level of assisted living as opposed to a nursing home. And with that, I feel like there's a chance for, assisted living could be a good step forward, at least by its original design, but I think it's become more than that, more than they intended it to be. Maybe not more, less than they intended to be. I don't know.
Yep.
One of those two.
Right. So the thing that I wrote down here, I've got a couple personal stories to talk about here. One story that stood out to me was Lou and Ruth, which is an older couple. And if I'm remembering the story right, Ruth passes away. And typically at that point, when your significant other passes away and you're elderly, one of two things happens. Either you're so heartbroken that you follow not long after, or if you've been the one that's taking care of them, you now find some independence and you find another reason for living. My grandma was kind of that way. She was taking care of my grandpa. And then when he passed away, it wasn't like she was biding time until he passed away. Like, she definitely loved him, but she found another purpose. And she was really involved with her church and did a bunch of stuff. And it was cool to see how she connected to something else when she needed to. And that's kind of what Lou did. They mentioned in here that Lou made friends easily. He didn't mind being alone. He played cribbage with friends. He went to the library, etc. And that totally reminded me of my great-grandma Clara, who lived to be, I believe, 98. And she lived in a town in Minnesota that my mom is from called Welch. There's only 60 people, but if you ski, you're probably familiar with Welch Village, which is like a big ski hill. It's like the only thing in the town. And I remember going to visit my grandma, who took care of my great-grandma, and they retrofitted her house so that she could use the bathroom and take a shower and all that stuff. My grandma took care of her. And every day she would go down the hill. In this town, there was like two stores, and one of them was a tavern. And she would go to the tavern at like 11:30 every day, and she would play euchre with a bunch of other old people. And so as I'm reading this story about Lou, I'm like, that is so my grandma Claire, because I never met my great grandpa. He passed away long before I was born, but that was like, she had so much fun doing that. And I thought that was kind of cool. But then also later in this story, as he evolves it and he talks about the assisted living part, he talks about Shelley, who was Lou's daughter, I believe. And they're looking at assisted living. Lou's in assisted living because he loses some of his independence. And she goes to visit him in the assisted living. On page 104, it says, what bothered Shelley most was how little curiosity the staff members seemed to have about what Lou cared about in his life and what he had been forced to forfeit. So basically, they didn't even care that he really got a lot of life out of playing cribbage and going to the library. And they didn't try to replace those things. It was just, you're here, you're on our terms. They didn't recognize their ignorance in this regard. They might have called the service they provided assisted living, but no one seemed to think it was their job to actually assist him with living, to figure out how to sustain the connections and the joys that most mattered to him. Their attitude seemed to result from incomprehension rather than cruelty, but as Tolstoy would have said, what's the difference in the end? Like, that's a really convicting paragraph, and I think that accurately describes a lot of assisted living situations. Again, not all.
Yes.
Okay. But I don't know, just one of these instances is enough for me to say, like, that's wrong. And we need to fix it. And it reminds me also of a story with Rachel's mom. Because really, what is the point of assisted living? Is it health and safety, or is it, like he talks about in page 104, is it to assist in actual living? Rachel's mom was working. She was doing childcare, I think, at a church, and she hurt her back on the job. They were being kind of dumb about the workman's comp stuff. She needed to have back surgery, and she was living in a downstairs apartment at the time. So we were like, this isn't going to work. You just come stay with us and stay as long as you need. So she had the surgery. We have a ranch house, so she moved into one of the bedrooms on the main floor. And she not only healed up, but she went back to school, once the workman's comp stuff got figured out. And she's actually graduating this Saturday with a communications degree. She's got a job all lined up.
Nice.
At the Boys and Girls Brigade. Like, it's awesome. She kind of reinvented herself, but it's encouraging to me to see that, because not to pat ourselves on the back, but I feel like that's the goal with assisted living. And depending on how old you are, maybe the end goal is a little bit different, but it's to help people get back on their feet, or to help people maintain the connections that are going to produce the quality of life that they want to have. It's not just to keep them safe.
So he gives the history of assisted living here too, like where that concept comes from. And again, I'm going to blank on names here, but the gal who basically dreamed this up or started to build it out had a lot to do with her mom, and her mom going into a nursing home and deciding, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to do something different. We're going to find a different way to help people in the end of life stages. And it was designed to help people maintain their own schedules, set their own, if they want to skip their meds, that's their call.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. Like, as much as we like to say, well, that's being unwise. That's not being safe. Like, you need to help them make sure what if they cause side effects that they don't like? And by taking their ability to make those decisions away from them, you're taking away their will to live at the same time.
Yes.
So there's something to be said for allowing people and I'm saying people there just to kind of separate myself from it to some degree, but allowing people to make their own decisions and make the calls in their own day-to-day life, because that gives them the dignity of having control over themselves and not having it dictated to them like it would in prison.
Yep.
So anyway, there you go.
Yeah. So page 89, to speak to the situation you were just discussing, he says, home is the one place where your own priorities hold way. At home, you decide how you spend your time, how you share your space, how you manage your possessions. Away from home, you don't. And so Wilson, I think was the lady's name, she talks to her mom about, well, what does your ideal place look like? And I actually wrote down the list. It's small with a little kitchen and a bathroom. It's going to have her favorite things in it. There's going to be people to help her with things that she can't do without assistance, but she'd have control. She could adjust the heat. She could lock the door, etc. Like you were saying, if she doesn't want to take her medication, she doesn't have to. No one would make her get up, turn off her favorite soaps, or ruin her clothes. She'd have privacy when she wanted. She'd be a person living in an apartment rather than a patient in a bed. So the history of this is that in 1983, Wilson and her husband created this thing called Park Place, which was assisted living. And over the years, Dr. Gawande says that assisted living becomes watered down, and that's where he talks about in page 104 with the story of Lou and assisted living. So it wasn't always this way, and he kind of explains the reason that it got this way is because the focus was no longer on helping Wilson's mother achieve the quality of life that she wanted, but it was focusing on that health and safety, because it's hard to measure Wilson's vision for assisted living. It's a lot easier to measure health and safety. So that's where the regulations are, and that's what gets measured. And the thing that I wrote down in response to that was a quote that he has. He says, "We want autonomy for ourselves and safety for those we love." And I think that applies to the middle-aged son or daughter who is looking at nursing homes for their parents. And I put as a comment, don't fall into this trap. So like you said, assisted living, like it's not all bad. It actually started out really good. It was a response to something that they saw in nursing homes that they wanted to fix. But over the years, because health and safety is the thing that is easy to measure, it's kind of evolved to that point, generally speaking.
I want to talk about Bill Thomas. Can we talk about Bill Thomas?
Yeah. Chapter 5, Bill Thomas. He's an interesting guy. Let me tell you, this was the bright spot in the entire book for me.
I read this whole story twice.
Yeah.
Because it made me want to throw a party.
So chapter 5 is actually called A Better Life. And Bill Thomas was actually, Dr. Gawande describes him in the book as more farmer than doctor. He was a homesteader who started working at a nursing home because of the regular day hours. And while he was there, he recognized that this isn't a great place. And so he wanted to inject life into the nursing home. And the director at the time told him, "You're confusing care and treatment," which maybe we want to unpack that. Maybe we don't. I don't know. But anyways, Bill Thomas believed, Bill Thomas believed that a good life was one of maximum independence, and so he sought to fix what he considered the 3 plagues of nursing homes: boredom, loneliness, and helplessness. And in this story, they talk about a couple specific things that he did. He proposed right away 2 dogs, 4 cats, and 100 birds. And he had trouble selling it initially, but once they got them, they found that the drug costs for the people who were living there fell 38%, and the death rate fell 15%. And so this brings up this whole idea of individualism versus loyalty to a cause bigger than yourself, because a lot of these people, the highlight of their day was taking care of their bird or taking the dog for a walk or whatever. Like even just something simple like caring for an animal, that was enough to infuse purpose behind their existence in that place. Which, when you think about it, if it's really that simple, like what a crime to let people stay in that place. And that's, again, there's so much nuance to all these different situations. Everybody's going to be a little bit different, but reading this story, it kind of makes you think like, yeah, there is a way out. There are things that you can do.
I just love this story. Like, like let's bring animals into a nursing home, and let's bring in a whole bunch and let them take care of the birds. It just made me smile. It made me happy. And I was kind of dumbfounded by the number of, like, Bill Thomas shared quite a few of the results that they had with that. Even so much as there were people who they had never heard speak before start to ask questions about whether or not they can walk the dogs.
Right.
Or, and that sort of thing starts to come out. It's like, okay, well, there's more of this that's mental than what we think.
Yep.
Like it's in our brains more than it is in the physical, in our biology, if you will. So I was thrilled to see this, and it kind of helped me realize that, because I thought about a number of the elderly folks that I have close relationships with. All of them have animals in some degree. It's like, kind of interesting. I don't know if that's related at all, but it was at least a point that was kind of interesting to me. But I like Bill Thomas. I think he has a great idea with how to improve the situation. I would be curious to see how it's still going today after a long-term process. But
yep.
I've not done my research there. Call me a failure. Whoops.
That's okay. No, I think really the big takeaway from here, because you spend so much up until this point talking about the negative atmosphere of these places, it's just injecting some positivity and some life into them and making you think that it's not as hopeless as maybe it appears up until this point.
So, chapter 6. It's time to let go, Mike.
This is a tough one.
Can we skip this one?
Well, I'd like to.
Okay. Let's not.
Chapter 6. Just real briefly, there is something that I want to call it from here. I actually have a ton of notes on this chapter because maybe I'm just a naive millennial, but I had no idea what hospice really was. I just knew it was something that when people said it, everybody else got real quiet. Like it was almost like a bad word. So this is the first time I really understood it. He explained it here. Hospice, he said, is only available for patients with a life expectancy that's less than 6 months. And the goal of hospice is to help people with fatal illnesses have the fullest lives possible right now. That seems like a really noble goal to me. And I understand why people don't want to talk about it, because it's almost like, oh, we're giving up at this point. And actually later on in this chapter, he talks about a concurrent care program where policyholders with life expectancy of less than a year were allowed to get hospice, but also still get the treatment. So when they did that, hospice use jumped from 26% to 70%, but they found that those people visited the emergency room half as often, and the use of hospitals and ICUs overall dropped by more than 2/3. And overall costs dropped by 25%. That's the not attractive part of this chapter that he talks a lot about, is like a lot of the spending that comes with healthcare, like 25% of Medicare spending, he said, is on the 5% of patients who are in their final year of their life. So the point he's making without really making it is maybe we shouldn't spend so much money on these people who are at the end. Right. Which isn't a fun conversation to have, but also the question in the back of my mind, and again, not trying to make this a religious discussion, but the big question here, and the reason why a lot of people don't want to talk about hospice, is like, why are we so afraid of death? This is a natural transition. Everybody is going to go through this. And maybe especially if we have something like a concurrent care program, maybe we can take advantage of this and we can work our way out of this. Just the fact that we have this support system, that means that we end up living a lot longer than we would have otherwise. Another point he makes here is that doctors typically overestimate how long people live. Out of 50 patients, they said 63% were overestimated, only 17% were underestimated. But the ones that were overestimated, their average estimate was 530% too high. So I don't know. There's just there's so much information and so much facts here that say like the best thing to do here is to provide the hospice care, to have your best life now, but also don't say we're pulling the plug, and continue to offer the care. Like going back to Mr. Lazaroff at the beginning, you give me every chance that I've got. Reading this chapter really struck me that you shouldn't have to, by saying yes to hospice care, that shouldn't be the concession that we're not going to give you every chance that you've got.
Well, I work on church staff. Well, I'm on my way out of working on church staff. So that's one of the side effects of me joining a company. But part of those conversations on our weekly staff meetings have been, there's a time when we pray for our church body and those who have requested prayer. So we have a whole prayer request process that they go through, which can sound kind of cold, but it's really quite endearing, and it's been a big part of our church. So it's common for the church staff to be talking about folks who just learned they had cancer, or they fell and now they're under hospice care, or this person had to move into a nursing home. But I feel like whenever the term hospice is thrown out, at least my experience firsthand with it is that we're not necessarily afraid to talk about it as much as we are realizing that means we need to go see them or go help in some way. So it hasn't necessarily been a kind of a scary thing. It's more of a call to action of sorts, which is probably the way it should be. But so I can't say that I share that reaction, Mike, where you hear the term hospice and you're a little bit afraid of it or don't want to talk about it. I can't say that we operate that way. That maybe that's just subcultures of areas and such, regional thing. I don't know, but at least that's been my reaction to it.
Yeah, and that's completely fair. That probably is the right reaction, and really it's the result of normalization of the conversation. Like I said, my grandparents passed away when I was quite a bit younger, and so I remember hearing the word thrown around, but also I remember more seeing the reaction on my mom and dad's faces and my aunt and uncle's faces whenever it was. It's just like something you didn't want to talk about. And so, again, I'm probably a naive millennial when it comes to this stuff, but like when he explained it in this book, it was kind of like, well, yeah, this is the right approach. This concurrent care program, where it's not just where you have to make the decision between hospice or having the surgery, giving the person every chance that they've got. Be willing to do both. And it sounds on the surface like doing both, maybe that's more expensive, but although the research shows that it's actually quite a bit less expensive, if that really is the concern. And again, like that's making it cold and based on a money decision instead of a person decision. But
right.
That's how insurance companies probably would look at the situation. Again, I'm not qualified to speak to this, but that's just the reaction that I had. The other thing here is the breakpoint discussions. So this comes from a story about Susan Block and her dad. And her dad needed to have surgery. Basically, there was surgery and there was some complications with his spine, I think. And she had to make a decision about whether to send him back in for surgery. And they had this breakpoint discussion, they call it, to sort out when to stop fighting for time and when to start fighting for something else. That's how Dr. Gawande describes it before they went in for the surgery. And her dad said, if I'm able to watch football and eat chocolate ice cream, keep me alive.
Which I love, by the way. I love that was so clear cut to him.
Yeah, and it sounds maybe too simple, or maybe it sounds, I don't know, like that's not real. But the story goes that complications in the surgery, doctor comes out, she's got to decide, she's got 3 minutes to decide about going back in for surgery on his spine. And because they had that conversation, she's able to ask the doctor if it's successful, is he going to be able to watch football and eat chocolate ice cream? And so, yep, easy decision. They go back in, they do the surgery, and he ends up living another 10 years and he writes 2 more books. So not only was he able to watch football and eat chocolate ice cream, he was able to write and do basically what he had been doing, what his life was all about up until that point.
Which is awesome.
But just taking the time to think that through, I think that's a really powerful point.
Yes. And at the same time, like that particular conversation is one that Dr. Gawande brings up with his dad, because it's about this point in the book where he starts to talk about his own personal experience with his father.
Yep.
And his father's decline because of some health issues as well. So he posed that question to his dad, and he's like, well, that wouldn't be enough for me. Like ice cream and football, like I have no interest in football. Like it's not a thing I'm going to do. But it at least sparked the conversation that they needed to have.
Yep.
Which is exactly what the next chapter is about, Mike. Hard conversations.
True. So there's a couple things from this chapter, but really I want to spend a big part of this chapter talking about Patch Adams.
It's fine.
So there's 3 different types of relationships between doctor and patient that he talks about in this section. There's paternalistic, where the doctors are the medical authorities aiming to ensure patients receive what they consider best. The doctor makes all the critical choices. Take the red pill. Okay. Then there's informative, which is the opposite. Doctors share the facts and figures. The rest is up to you. So the doctor is the technical expert. The patient's the consumer. And this is the more common way. He says, here's what the red pill does. Here's what the blue pill does. You decide. But he argues that the ideal one is called interpretive. It's in between, where the doctor helps the patient determine what they want. And only when the doctor knows these answers can they say whether you should have the red pill or blue pill. It's kind of a shared decision-making process. Okay. And as he was going through this, I texted you because I was thinking about the movie Patch Adams, which I hadn't watched in a really long time. But I remembered the doctor at the beginning of that movie when he checks himself into the the medical or the mental hospital, and he's talking to him, and the doctor's not even listening. Like he's totally the paternalistic guy. He's like, I'm the one who can make the decisions about whether you're cured and you can live independently or not. And I went back and watched the movie. I asked you if you would do it too, and maybe we could share some insights from this, because I was pretty amazed after I watched it how much of an emotional impact that movie had on me after reading this book. And again, this is totally Hollywood, so I'm sure that you could nitpick a bunch of stuff in here, but there's some really profound things I think that happen here. Like when he's checking himself into the psych ward and he's narrating through all of the things that are going through in his head. That felt a lot to me like the description of what people go through before they enter a nursing home. And then even once he gets in there, they say, wake up is at 7 a.m. and they lock the door behind him. You know, the doctor doesn't listen. He doesn't really care about the patients. Like that kind of, it attaches an image to it. And again, it's Hollywood. It's a movie, but you see it in a way. I don't know. I saw it different when I read this. After I read this book, it hit me in a more profound way. And obviously, the character in that movie, Patch Adams, he's able to just walk out of there and completely change his life because he gets this revelation that I really want to help people. In fact, he tells the doctor at one point, "I want to help people." He's like, "That's what I do." He's like, "Yeah, but you suck at it. You don't even look at people when they're talking to you." You know. So I don't know. What was your response, or what when you went back and watched the movie?
Well, I didn't get a chance to actually watch it, but it's only been, I think, 2 years ago since I watched it most recently. So I went and watched a bunch of like the trailers and stuff just to refresh my memory on it. Because I do have, because I remember watching it and seeing that as something that I wished happened more.
Yeah.
Now, granted, so it's a Robin Williams movie.
Which alone, by the way, knowing what we know now about him committing suicide, like,
yeah,
wow. you go through that movie and you see him going, his character is portraying this internal struggle. Later on in the movie, he's contemplating suicide, and you're like, wow.
Yep.
I had no idea when I watched it the first time.
Yeah. It's bone chilling when you start thinking through all the nuances that come with it. So yeah, it's a fascinating movie. I think if you were to read Being Mortal and then turn around and watch it in the way that you just did, Mike, I could definitely see how that could really almost mess with your head.
It does.
Like, wait, what? Like, this is, yes, that's exactly what. I could definitely see those reactions. But
it totally personifies what Dr. Gawande is talking about. In fact, we just got done talking about the 3 different types of relationship between doctor and patient. And the dean, when he first gets into medical school, Robin Williams' character, he says, first, do no harm. And that made me ask the question after reading this book, like, what is harm?
Yeah.
Is keeping them alive even though they're miserable, is that harm? Or is it not doing everything that you can to extend the life of the patient? Like, there's so many questions that he's struggling with that I did not even realize in the nuance of how that film was, or how that movie was filmed. He says in that same speech, the dean, he says, we're going to train the humanity out of you. And I was like, wow, like Dr. Gawande was just talking about this, how we don't address these things in the medical system and we need to change this. And then like, here's this guy in this movie who's totally living up to the stereotype that Dr. Gawande just painted in this picture.
Perfectly too. Like, that's to a T. That is the type of doctor you do not want. But, that's the way the movie goes, but that's also the exact relationship that Dr. Gawande is almost warning against. And how, go back to one of the questions I asked at the very beginning. Is taking a week of treatments to prolong your life by 2 days better than just taking the week that you had to spend it with grandkids?
Yep.
Is it doing harm to do the treatment to extend your life by those 2 days? In that particular case, I would say yes. Right now, not being in the situation and having zero emotional ties to it right now. Like, that's the decision I feel like I should make. But trying to think that through from a doctor and from a training aspect, like when doctors are in school, like, how do you teach that? Like, that's not simple, I don't think. Like, 'cause you're basically teaching people to be subjective.
Yep.
Which brings all kinds of potential messiness with it, and how are insurance companies supposed to deal with that?
Exactly. And then when something goes wrong, whose fault is it?
Right.
If it's subjective and you did something, I can totally see how that can haunt you. I can totally see how Dr. Gawande deals with that nightmare that he describes at the beginning, where the corpses of the people who died showed up at his house. And when I watched the movie, there's a point in there. So spoiler alert right now, if you've not watched Patch Adams and you don't want to know how this ends, turn off the podcast right now. Because there is a point in there where Patch Adams convinces everybody that is around him that the thing to do is to increase the quality of the patient's life. So they kind of go and they start their own clinic. It's not really a clinic, but it's just a place where they can go show care to people who need something. Maybe they need a Band-Aid, or they need they sprained an ankle or whatever. They're not professing to be like a medical alternative, but they're for all of the people who aren't getting the human element of the care that they want when they go to the hospital. Okay. So there's this guy, Larry, who walks in and he makes a call later and he says he needs some help. Okay. So Patch Adams' character, he falls in love with this other medical student, Corinne. She gets the call and she goes to Larry's house. Larry ends up, they don't show anything, so it's not brutal or anything, but he ends up killing her and himself. And Patch Adams, that rocks him, and he basically walks away from medical school. He's about to graduate. He's just like, everything I know is wrong. And he's talking to Truman, who's another medical student. He's like, you can't just walk away from this place. You're the one who did this. Corinne's death doesn't change anything. Like, we still need to help these people. And Patch's struggle when she dies, he's like, I taught her the medicine that killed her. Oh, ouch. Twist the knife a little deeper, like I can see where, especially as a doctor, like Dr. Gawande, you're going to constantly be going back to the lives of the patients that you have delivered care to and saying, like, have I done everything? Have I done the right thing? Especially if you don't have any formal training in geriatric care or whatever the case may be. Geriatric care is one small subset of this, but it's also a point that stood out to me. He said that they really don't teach this, and this is where the need is. This is where we're completely unqualified as doctors, Dr. Gawande's words, to minister to these people and to care for their real needs. It's so powerful. Now, the movie isn't all negative. It ends on a positive. The dean tries to keep him from getting his medical license. He ends up getting it, and he delivers this really passionate speech at the end in front of the medical board. And he says a couple things which really I thought encapsulated the whole idea behind this book, is that a doctor's mission should be not just to prevent death, but also to improve the quality of life. If you treat the disease, you win or you lose. If you treat the person, you win every time. And I thought that was a really powerful idea.
And I feel like that encompasses a lot of this book.
Yes.
Single-handedly.
Yep, exactly. I could not believe after I watched it how many parallels I found. Because I did go back and I watched the whole thing. And I was trying to take notes as I was going through, but a lot of times I just found myself just sucked into the emotion of the movie in a way that I never had been before. So I don't know. If this is an interesting topic to you, I definitely recommend that movie, especially after listening to this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Give it a new light for sure. Yeah. One more chapter. Okay. You ready? Courage. I have to admit that whenever I saw the title for this, the only thing that came into my mind was Phil Schiller on the stage at Apple when they pulled the headphone jack out of the iPhone.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even think about that. I'm glad I did.
That was the first thing that came to my mind.
Glad I didn't. Wow.
I'm sorry. There you go. Easter egg of the day.
I'm not sure I can even talk about this now.
Yes. 2 kinds of courage. I'll cue you up. How about that?
So the 2 different kinds of courage that are required in aging and sickness that he outlines in this chapter are the courage to confront the reality of mortality and the courage to act on the truth that we find. And I think that's a great way to articulate this. He defines courage as strength in the face of knowledge of what is to be feared or hoped. Like I said at the beginning, there is a faith element to this for me, which maybe overrides some of this stuff, but not all of it. And again, I'm not in the situation where I can really say like, oh, this is what I would do. It's way more difficult than that. But this is, I hate this chapter. This is the chapter where he shares the story of how his dad died. And he obviously has a very close relationship with his dad, and he basically is very detailed in all of the steps along the way to his father leaving. And I think it's really sad. It's very emotional. It does raise a very powerful and interesting question. He does call out in this chapter the fact that like he's been talking about we don't want to just keep people alive, but there's also the other side of this, which is not necessarily great either. In fact, in the Netherlands, I believe, like 1 in 35 people have an assisted suicide. Like that's not the right answer either. So he kind of ends it as like there's these different ends of the spectrum. What we're shooting for is something in the middle, but we shouldn't just say we want to keep the person alive. We shouldn't just say we want to make them happy. But we have to consider all of the information when deciding what is best for the patient. And by the way, this is really emotional for me too. So I don't know. By the end of this chapter, you're just in tears.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
Yes. But, you know, he takes you through the whole process of his father's death. And he's a very good writer. He's very descriptive. And this is a very emotional story for him. So he spells it out in a lot of detail. Yes, he talks about courage. He talks about the courage to confront, you know, that you are dying, and then the courage to act on it. He talks about, you know, how we have this illusion of control, how we feel like we have control over everything all the way up to the end, but you really don't. You just kind of have to navigate your way through what happens. And through all of that story, you know, the bulk of the chapter is about his father's story, which means that when you're talking about courage here, he's telling you how they went through theirs.
Yep.
Well, like through their personal scenario, and how his mom fought it.
Right.
How his siblings fought it to some degree. And what happened afterwards? What did they do after his father died? And how did that help them bring closure? It's hard to read this. It really is. Because you can't help but think, what would I do in that situation? And you can't help but wonder, like, if that were me, if I was Dr. Gawande's father in this situation, which was a little confusing to some degree because his father was a doctor as well, so they would refer to him as Dr. Gawande too. So it got a little confusing here and there,
right,
over that. But they did a lot of things right. They did a few things wrong. They will tell you that. But that's what he's getting at. You feel like you have control over the whole situation. But even though they had everything done right, they were in the middle of hospice care, they felt like they had a good handle on everything, some things happened. His dad made a decision. He was a doctor, so he was always messing with his own medications. He decided to do something different with his medications, and it caused him to go into some form of shock, and it scared his mom. So she called 911. That's what she did. Well, that ended up causing more pain than it should have.
Yeah.
What she should have done in that case is called hospice care, and they could have worked through it, and everything would have been fine, it seems.
But they didn't want to consider hospice because of the stigma attached to it.
Yeah, they didn't want to do all of that. So it was hard to make those decisions. They had a lot of these difficult conversations that we've been talking about. If you're able to have X, Y, and Z, is it worth continuing life, or should we pull the plug? Not a fun conversation, definitely a hard one to have, but you have to have, in this case, the courage to have those conversations and act on it. That's what he's talking about. And again, they didn't do everything right. They will tell you that through his father's process. But what he's trying to do, and I think he does a very good job in his story, is show just how messy it can be and how hard it can be, and how much you feel like you can control the situation and yet you can't.
Yep.
And that's what he's getting at, is you have to navigate your way through this in the moment and just make sure that you're constantly talking about it instead of just making assumptions. Because how many times did they talk about these conversations that you had to have, and the person who was ill shares with the caretaker what they would want in an end-of-life situation, and it's completely different than what the caretaker was expecting.
Yeah.
Like, that just blew, like, ice cream and football? Really? That's
right.
it? You don't ever watch sports. Why does that, that's what happens.
Yep.
And I think that's really important. It's hard to get your head around it. It's an emotional process, but it's a vital process.
Definitely. And the last point here, the illusion of control. So there's really like two different selves that he describes in this last chapter: the experiencing self, who endures every moment equally, and then the remembering self, who gives almost all the weight of judgment afterwards to 2 points in time, the worst moment and the last one. So this kind of gets into maybe predictably irrational territory, or the art of thinking clearly, where like you can't trust the way that you're thinking about things. But the main takeaway here, and really the thing that kind of struck me, is that no one ever has control, but we're not helpless either. So maybe rephrase that: no one ever has complete control. So there are things that you can do. There's things that you can do to influence the quality of your life as you come to the end of your life. But it is something that everybody deals with, and there are no easy answers. And you need to ask the tough questions in order to figure out what the right situation is for each individual. The last chapter, we talked about the old model where the patient comes to the physician and the physician just tries to fix him or her. And Dr. Gawande proposes a new model where we figure out how to navigate the end of this life together. Again, not a fun conversation to have, not a very uplifting read, but I'm very glad that I read it. I really appreciate Dr. Gawande's perspective, and I feel like he's the perfect person to have written this.
Yeah, I don't know how well it would have come across from anyone else, so I think it was perfectly done by him.
So take his word for it, not ours.
There's that. So we've made our way through the book. You feel better now, Mike?
I do. Until this releases, and then people point out all the dumb things that I said.
Okay, action items. I have one here. Do you have anyone you want to add to this?
No.
All
I'm
right.
not putting that action item on there yet. It's not happening for a while.
I'm going to attempt to start this conversation.
You let me know how it goes.
I don't know that I want to. It's not one that I'm looking forward to at all. And it may not happen soon either. This may be something that doesn't happen for a year because I'm not sure. It's not a thing I think needs to happen over the phone. It means it has to happen in person. And especially with my parents, with my parents, I don't think we're not able to connect face to face very often because of the distance between us. My in-laws, we could probably have that conversation very quickly, but it's one that I at least want to embark on starting. Of how do you want us to handle things? Like, I know, for example, my mother-in-law has been telling us for years now, don't put me in a nursing home, I'm coming to live with you. Like, she's been telling us that for a while. So, like, okay, we've been joking about this for years now. Let's talk about it. Let's be honest and figure it out. So I want to at least start that.
Sure.
Again, I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know how to report back on it until it happens. And I may not remember to bring it up once it does happen, but I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
So I'm going to attempt it.
You're a brave man, Joe Bulig.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right. Yeah, no action items for me. Style and rating. I almost want to skip this part.
How do you rate a book about end-of-life care?
So I'll rate it from a bookworm perspective. And that is based off of the entire history of Bookworm and why we started Bookworm. Okay. And I will give this 4 stars because I feel like the information that's provided here is great information. I find that there really isn't anything actionable from this other than having that conversation. And even that's not something that's going to happen in the next couple years for me. And so when you think about like, why do we read books and why do we have Bookworm in the format that we have it? Why do we do the follow-up every week? Stuff like that. Like, this book really doesn't fit, but it's a good book. I would recommend that people read it. I was really challenged reading it. It was an emotional read. It inspired me to go back and watch Patch Adams again. I found myself like really emotional in the description of like the nursing homes and the assisted living, and just deciding then and there, like, this is not happening for my parents. But I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know what you can expect from this book other than having your perspective changed a little bit. I even think like Man's Search for Meaning was more actionable than this one. Which obviously that one is one of my favorite books of all time. This was a really difficult read. It was hard for me to get through it, but I'm really glad that I read it. I'll just leave it at that.
Sure. Well, you can find excuses around it all you want, but I'm going to give it a 5.0, which I don't think I've done for a while. I have a lot of reasons for that. I had a hard time finding really any fault with it from a book stance. Like, I feel like he covered at least every point around this topic that I feel like I would want covered, and he did it in a very well thought out and a well designed way. Per conversations we've had in the past, I feel like the length of this was spot on. It's kind of long, but I feel like it needed to be long in this case, which is kind of weird. We usually say the other thing.
Yep.
Like, this is way too long. This should have been a blog post. Like, no, this was almost 270 pages, and it needed every one of them.
Yep.
I felt like, as much as, I only have the one action item, it's about the only action item I feel like you could get out of this.
Right.
From a broad perspective. I'm sure there's a lot of little stuff that you could pull from it. But I do think that this is one, and I've recommended this already to a lot of people, especially in our church. And I continue to tell people to pick it up. I don't know that I run across many people that I would say shouldn't read it, just because I feel like it's been so important as far as understanding. Because everyone's going to approach this topic at some point.
True. Whether
it's with relatives, friends, yourself, like, everyone's going to approach this at some point. So that means I feel you should have at least thought this through to some level, or at least be aware of it. That's why I put it at the 5.0. I think it's well worth that. It's done very well. And I loved reading it as much as it was hard to read. It's been a long time since I've cried that much reading a book. The number of times I was reading this and Becky, my wife, would look at me like, "You all right over there?" "Yes, I'm fine. Leave me alone." Like, just let me do this. So,
yeah.
yes. So there you go.
Well, I think 5-0 is definitely it's definitely you deserved. Atul or Dr. Gawande is a very, very good writer. There is tons of personal story in here. There's tons of research. Like, it checks all the boxes for me, other than what am I going to do with this?
Right.
And if you were to say, give me the 5 most influential books that you've ever read that I'm just getting into productivity, just getting into self-help, because that's typically, I'm just going to go out and say, like, that's typically where Bookworm resides.
Right.
The average person who comes to Bookworm, they're coming here as a productivity podcast for the most part. Okay. And so looking at it through that lens, like, what are the top 5 books that I should read? This isn't going to be on the list, but that doesn't mean that it's not a phenomenal book.
Totally going to be on that list.
Well, think about it this way. Like, a lot of the people that listen to Bookworm do so because they want the Cliff Notes versions of the books. Okay. If you listen to this podcast and you don't go read this book, you are a fool. You cannot, like you said, this book is the perfect length. It's kind of long, but it needs every word that he uses. I totally agree with that. This is not something that you can skip through. You can't abbreviate this in any way, shape, or form. It's just such a heavy topic. But because of that, I kind of feel like it doesn't really fit, which is my only knock on this. I'm saying this just to say, like, I'm putting it at 4.0 for those reasons, but I completely agree with your 5.0 rating. And if this is the right thing for you at this season of your life, like, absolutely, definitely, this is the thing that you should pick up and read next.
Right.
You won't be disappointed. Dr. Gawande, like I said, he's a phenomenal writer. He's so good. Not just like it's interesting to read him, which is how some of the books that we read, like Chris Bailey is a great writer because he keeps you interested. Then there's people like Mihaly who, like, you can tell they're just really, really smart. Dr. Gawande is both. He's phenomenal. I would not hesitate to read another book by him, even though this is, I think, maybe the second repeat author we've had in Bookworm history.
Yeah, there's a couple we've done, yeah. Cool. All right, we can put this one on the shelf. What's next, Mike?
Put the tear stained pages on my shelf.
Yep, go for it.
All right, so the next one is my number 1 book of all time, I think, when we did the Bookworm draft.
Yes.
And that is The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. This one does not have any votes in the Bookworm Club, but my wife read it recently. So sorry, everybody in the club. My wife's saying I should go back and revisit this one. I totally agree with her. So for the most part, we are going to go off of those ratings every once in a while. I'm going to pull a trump card though, and I feel like this is one. It's my favorite book of all time. We got to cover it for Bookworm. It's kind of unbelievable that we haven't done it yet. So,
all right, listeners. So you heard it here. Mike's wife trumps you all. I'm sorry. I guess we're going to do The One Thing next then because of Rachel. Thanks,
yep,
Rachel.
You can blame her totally.
I've not read it, so this will be good.
I should also say that I picked this one now because of my current situation.
Yeah, I wondered.
I feel like this is the right thing at the right time. So selfishly, that's why I picked it.
Yeah.
But also going back to the Bookworm library and catalog, like, I'm kind of ashamed that we don't have one on The One Thing. So this is an episode that I want to have in the catalog.
Got it. Well, following The One Thing, I have selected Blink by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yes.
I feel like Gladwell is one of these authors that people love or hate, it seems.
Yep.
And I feel like we should at least enter that world to some degree. He's got a few books out. I selected Blink partially because I already owned it. And partially because I like some of the taglines and stuff that come with it. The power of thinking without thinking. So I don't know. I'm just kind of interested in that one specifically. So we'll dive into Gladwell a little bit.
Cool. Gap books. I've got one, and there's a story behind this one, by the way.
Ooh, stories.
So I had a Skype call with a Bookworm listener who wanted to talk about the faith-based productivity stuff that I've got spinning up. And they recommended to me a book called Do More Better by Tim Challies, I believe is how you say his name. It is a Christian perspective to productivity systems. It is a short book. I started it. It's pretty interesting. And I am excited to get through the rest of this. I just am like a chapter in, but it gets into a lot of the systems that Matt Perman tried to address in What's Best Next, but it's a really short book.
Yeah.
I forget how many pages it is. Does it say on Amazon? It's little though. Like you could probably get through this in a couple of hours if you just crank through it, but there's so much stuff in here that there's going to be a pretty decent MindNode file for this.
Sure. MindNode is now a part of SetApp, by the way.
I saw that. So go sign up for SetApp right now, and then go sign up for my newsletter so you can get the MindNode files. No, those are PDFs, but...
Yeah, no, huge fan of SetApp. I've got a Gap book this time, Mike.
I see that. Exciting.
A Place of My Own by Michael Pollan. Show of hands, who knows Michael Pollan? I don't know if you raised your hand or not.
I'm not raising my hand.
He has written... Is this his third? He's written 3 or 4 books. His other ones that are more well-known is The Omnivore's Dilemma and In Defense of Food. So he's a journalist in the diet world, if you will. He's got another one, too. I forget what it is. Cooked, I think is what it is. Yeah, I've read all 3 of those. Yeah, so call me a Michael Pollan fan. Anyway, this one came before all of those. And it was the tagline on it is The Architecture of Daydreams. He built... like his own little room out in the woods so that he could do his writing and reading.
That's amazing.
And that's where he wrote 1.5 of his books. So he goes through the process. He's not a handyman at all. So he goes through the process of how did he learn architecture and design and go about building this place, which sounded fascinating to me because I feel like I want to build a place like this at some point. Thankfully, my wife doesn't listen to this podcast, so she doesn't know that I'm plotting this. So there you go.
All right. Cool. So if you want to recommend a book, I promise I will look at your recommendations and pick one from the club next time.
Until Rachel trumps it.
Nope, not true. I'm going on the record right now. I'm going to pick a listener recommendation for next time. So get your recommendations in. As we're recording this, by the way, I just recorded through the Bookworm Club. I got connected with Patrick from Knowledge Without College podcast. We recorded that yesterday, so I don't know when that's going to go live, but
nice.
That was a fun conversation, and he said he's going to go recommend some books too. So cool. You can join Patrick, recommend your books at the Bookworm Club, which is club.bookworm.fm. You can also get there via the website, bookworm.fm/list. Just click the button to recommend a book, and you will also see a list of all of the books that we have covered, including Amazon links to buy them, which are affiliate links. So if you want to support the podcast, that is one of the ways that you can do that.
Another way you can support us is with iTunes reviews. We love reading these things. They're fun.
Yes, we do.
I don't care if it's good or bad. I just like reading them. I feel like...
I have to call out one, by the way. WebGuy9402 gave it 4 stars. Says, please add chapter bookmarks. Great podcast, but I'd like to be able to skip all the follow-ups and jump straight into the book discussions. Even moving through the book discussions with chapters will be very helpful. And since I started editing the podcast a couple of episodes ago, there are actually chapter bookmarks in the episodes. I'm not sure if people have noticed that.
Huh.
So you can skip the follow-up by clicking the chapter button in your podcast player that supports it. I know not all of them do, but I wanted to address that so other people know that there are actually chapter bookmarks in the most recent episodes.
Why would you skip our follow-up?
Anyway.
Just gonna throw that out there.
Maybe they're sick of hearing about you and your meditation practices.
So here's a good thing to call out. We do read these reviews, and sometimes we do act on what you say.
Yes, we do.
I
don't think I said quote unquote at all this episode.
I was trying to think of a way to use it right now. But there's some feedback we'll take, and then we'll just do exactly what you tell us not to do. But if you have good feedback, we would love to hear it, or if it's just something you want us to know, that's a really good way to let us know. Another way to jump into the conversation around Bookworm is to just join the club, club.bookworm.fm. Some fun conversations around the episodes and stuff that happen out there. And if you want to share maybe your action items, and we can follow up with you. No one would skip that. They just wouldn't click it. So, you can share your action items on the club as well. If you're looking for some of the accountability that Mike and I have through the show, and if you don't have someone to do that with, the club is a great place to do that. So club.bookworm.fm.
Join the podcast book club. Submit a review, help us take down KCRW, and we will talk to you next time when we cover The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan.